My name is Chrissy Teigen, and I'm 49 years old. This story, I never imagined I'd share it. But if someone out there is going through something similar, maybe it'll give them the strength they need. It was supposed to be a quiet day off, a rare one. I had just poured myself a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I opened that door. There stood Matt, my son-in-law, looking like he'd chewed nails for breakfast. His face was twisted in irritation, arms crossed like the world owed him something. And next to him was my daughter, Sarah, my sweet girl. But she didn't look like herself. She was ghostly pale, her skin dull and patchy, her hair messy, her whole presence fragile like glass about to shatter. My heart sank. Something was very, very wrong, I asked, trying to stay calm. "What's going on here?" Matt gave a snort, shoved his hands into his pockets, and replied like he was doing me a favor. "It's simple. She says she's not feeling well and can't do the housework." He didn't even look at Sarah. He just kept talking like she wasn't standing there, clearly struggling. "I'm in the middle of launching a business," he said, annoyed. "Having someone who can't manage her own health or help around the house, that's just dead weight." My blood boiled. It had been years since I'd felt rage so sharp. I looked at him, square in the face, and asked, "Do you even hear what you're saying?" He didn't flinch. "I'm just being honest. I don't know what you think is going on here, but there's no reason to yell at me. Useless fat people are just a burden." Then, without a trace of shame, he looked me in the eye and said, "She's your daughter. You deal with her." My hand twitched. I wanted to slap him, but I held myself back. My priority wasn't him. It was Sarah. I took a deep breath, stepped between them, and said firmly, "I don't want someone like you near my daughter ever again. Sarah is staying with me. Leave now." He narrowed his eyes and muttered some insult under his breath. But I didn't care. I shut the door in his face, locked it, and turned back to my daughter. She could barely walk. I wrapped my arm around her and led her to the couch in the living room. I made her favorite apple tea and sat beside her, heartbreaking. She didn't speak at first. She just held the warm cup in her hands like it was the only solid thing left in her world. Minutes passed. Then, with a quiet, trembling voice, she began to speak. "Let me take you back a little so you understand. I married young, at 22, to a man I met in college. It was a whirlwind romance, the kind people write novels about. A year later, we were blessed with a baby girl, Sarah. For a few years, we were a happy family of 3 in a modest apartment. Life was simple, but full of love. Then, when Sarah was just 2, my husband fell gravely ill and passed away suddenly. Everything shattered. From that moment, I became both mother and father to my little girl. I worked long hours, sometimes taking on 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Raising Sarah became my entire life. Her smile? It was the only thing that got me through the toughest days. Sarah grew up quiet, gentle, and incredibly kind. A bit shy, but she had this calm energy that made people feel safe. She eventually became a caregiver by profession. Of course she did. That's who she is. Then one day, she introduced me to Matt. He was 2 years older, worked for a company that sold caregiving equipment, and had met Sarah through her job. I remember the day she brought him over like it was yesterday. I was surprised at first. Sarah had always been wary around men, probably from growing up without a father figure. But Matt? He was charming, polite, said all the right things. I even got carried away showing him baby pictures of Sarah. She was embarrassed, of course, but I could see the way he looked at her, with affection, or so I thought. They got married soon after. They even went to Greece for their honeymoon, Sarah's dream trip. I'd never been able to take her anywhere far, because money had always been tight. Seeing the photos of them smiling on a sunny Greek beach brought tears to my eyes. 6 months after the wedding, Matt called me, him, not Sarah, to share the good news. "Sarah's pregnant," he said, practically shouting with joy. I cried happy tears that night. I thought life had finally given my daughter what she deserved, but little did I know, that was the beginning of the storm. As Sarah's due date approached, I got busier at work. I couldn't visit her as often as I wanted, and every time I called, she'd tell me not to worry. "I'm okay, Mom, really." But I had this nagging feeling. Something was off, and I was right. That day, when Matt dropped her off like she was some broken appliance, everything came crashing down. Sarah didn't resist. She barely spoke. I tucked her into bed, brought her soup, rubbed her back, did everything I could to bring her comfort. It took hours for her to fully open up, and when she did, my heart shattered. She told me that at the start of their marriage, Matt had been kind, thoughtful. He helped her plan the wedding, listened to her nervous rambling, supported her through the first few months of pregnancy. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Maybe it was the pressure of work. Maybe it was his own ambition getting the better of him. Whatever it was, it turned him into a cold, cruel man. He started lashing out, criticizing her for being tired, for not keeping the house clean enough, for not having dinner ready on time, all while she was dealing with severe morning sickness and back pain. When she went on maternity leave, he insisted she do everything at home. "You're not working anymore," he said. "So what excuse do you have?" Sarah would wake up at 4 a.m. to pack his lunch and make his breakfast. She cleaned the house from top to bottom every single day. If she forgot to wipe the sink or missed a corner of dust, he'd yell, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Even meals became a war zone. If she didn't write down his complaints, he'd accuse her of not paying attention. Eventually, she stopped eating with him. She'd eat in silence after he went to bed, alone, pregnant, and numb. She couldn't even taste food anymore, but for the baby's sake, she forced herself to eat. And through all of this, she never told me. She didn't want me to worry. By the time she finished talking, I was crying. I tried to hide it, but she noticed. And even then, after everything, she was the one comforting me, rubbing my back, whispering, "It's okay, Mom." "No, Sarah, it wasn't okay. None of it was." I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight. "I'm sorry I didn't notice," I said. "I should have known something was wrong." She shook her head. "No, Mom, I should have said something. I wanted to believe it would get better." "It's not your fault," I told her. "You did your best. You've always done your best. From now on, let's go back to living how we used to, peacefully, just us." Her body began to tremble. Then, for the first time in months, Sarah let go. She cried, loud, wrenching sobs that shook her whole frame. I cried with her. That night, we made a simple dinner and shared it like old times. We laid out blankets in the living room and fell asleep beside each other, surrounded by warmth and a quiet promise. She was safe now. 3 weeks passed. Sarah was still fragile, but every day she smiled a little more, laughed a little louder. We spent our days together, cooking, talking, taking slow walks around the garden. I watched the color return to her face, the life return to her voice. She was slowly becoming herself again. And then the big day came. Sarah gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy, my first grandchild. He had Sarah's soft cheeks, her little button nose, and the quiet strength I knew was already in his bones. The first time I held him, my heart felt like it might burst. I whispered to him, "You're safe now, sweetheart. Grandma's got you." But despite the joy, there was still one shadow hanging over us, Matt. He hadn't contacted Sarah once. Not during her hospital stay, not during the birth, not after. I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't force a father to be involved, but I couldn't hide the birth from him either. So I stepped out into the hallway one afternoon and pulled out my phone. First call, straight to voicemail. Second call, nothing. Third time, I didn't even try. I shoved my phone into my purse with a deep sigh. "So much for being a father," I muttered. 3 days later, just when I'd begun to hope maybe we'd never see him again, he showed up. Matt. But he wasn't alone. Leaning on his arm like she belonged there was a woman I had never seen before, caked in makeup, dressed like she was headed to a nightclub, not a maternity ward. She smirked at me like I was the intruder. And Matt, he waltzed in like he owned the place. Sarah was sitting up in bed, holding the baby. The moment she saw them, the blood drained from her face. She clutched her newborn tighter, instinctively pulling him close like a lioness protecting her cub. I stood up immediately and blocked their path. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice cold. Matt didn't even blink. "This is Kristen, my colleague. I'm planning to start my business with her. Unlike Sarah, she's actually competent." His words sliced through the room, but worse than what he said was the way he said it. So casual, so smug, like Sarah was nothing but an inconvenience he'd finally offloaded. He looked at Sarah and said, "Let me formally introduce you. Kristen is my girlfriend. We've been together for 6 months." I stared at him in disbelief. 6 months. That meant he'd started cheating on Sarah before she was even in her 3rd trimester. Kristen giggled. "Not fat or slow like your ex, huh, babe?" Then she turned to Sarah, reached into her designer handbag, and pulled out a piece of paper. She waved it dramatically in front of her face. "Here's some child support. Sign the divorce papers, will you?" she said sweetly. "Don't worry, it's pocket change to us." They laughed together, loudly, in Sarah's hospital room, standing over her bed, acting like this was some reality show drama. I couldn't move. I was too shocked, too angry, too hurt. Sarah didn't say a word. Her hands were shaking. She kept her eyes on the baby, holding him so close I was afraid she'd squeeze him too hard. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Not in front of them. Then Matt stepped forward, stepped toward her, and leaned over the baby. He looked down, made a face, and actually said, "Ugh, even the baby's ugly, just like his mother." I gasped. I heard another woman in the hospital room let out a sharp breath. The nurse, who had just walked in to check vitals, dropped her clipboard. Then Kristen added with a cruel smile, "If it was my kid, it'd be cute. Right, Matt?" They laughed again. That was the final straw. Before I could speak, the woman in the next bed, a middle-aged patient named Louise, spoke up. "How dare you come in here and say that to a woman who just gave birth?" The nurse chimed in too. "Sir, you need to leave immediately. This is completely unacceptable." But Matt didn't care. He turned to Sarah again, voice raised. "Well, are you going to sign the divorce or not?" Sarah didn't speak. She just nodded faintly. And then they left, just like that, laughing, arms wrapped around each other. When the door finally shut behind them, I turned to Sarah. Her face was expressionless. Her body was stiff. But her eyes were empty. That night, the stress of the confrontation, combined with the physical toll of childbirth, caused Sarah to crash. Her vitals dropped. The doctors decided to move her to another ward for extended recovery. I took a leave of absence from work and moved into the hospital with her. Every day I cared for the baby. Every night I whispered to her, "We're going to get through this." And slowly, piece by piece, she began to heal again. Her new hospital roommate was a woman named Eileen. She was in her late 30s, recovering from surgery. Friendly, down to earth, with a loud laugh and a kind heart. She and Sarah became close almost instantly. Eileen reminded me of the kind of friend every woman needs, the no-nonsense, I've got your back type. They chatted often. Eileen listened, truly listened, to everything Sarah had been through. And as days passed, I noticed something change in my daughter. She started smiling more, holding the baby with more confidence, sitting up straighter. I don't think she even realized it, but she was slowly stepping back into her own light. Then one afternoon, the hospital room door burst open. There was no knock, no warning. Matt, again. I turned so fast I nearly dropped my cup of tea. Aileen sat upright in her bed, eyes narrowing. Sarah froze, her arms instantly wrapping protectively around the baby. "What are you doing here?" I snapped. Matt smirked. "I came to visit. This is my kid, after all." He walked over to Sarah's bed like he had any right to be there. I blocked him with my body. "You're banned from visiting," I said. "The staff was supposed to be notified." "Well," he said, shrugging, "guess they didn't get the memo after the room change." He plopped down into a chair like he belonged there and started talking. Not to Sarah, not to me, just bragging. "My business is almost off the ground. Big clients lined up. Things are looking good." Then he turned to Sarah and said it. "So I'll take the baby now, as my heir, hand over custody." I blinked. I thought I must have misheard. But no. He sat there as if asking for a pen, not a baby. Eileen was the first to react. "Excuse me?" she said. "Do you even hear yourself?" Matt rolled his eyes. "Mind your business." That's when I lost it. I got in his face. I told him he was delusional, that he had no right, that he had abandoned his wife, insulted her, brought another woman to the hospital, laughed in her face, called her baby ugly, and now he wanted custody? Our voices grew louder and louder until a knock. It was Aileen's husband. He had overheard the shouting from the hallway and rushed in. Matt turned toward him, all puffed up with arrogance, until he froze, his face drained of color. You're the president?" he stammered. Aileen's husband crossed his arms. "That's right." Matt's mouth fell open. "This woman is your wife?" Eileen's husband nodded. "And I've heard everything." Sarah let out a quiet laugh, bitter but real. I glanced at her and for the first time saw a flash of power in her eyes. Matt tried to backpedal, but it was too late. He apologized, weakly, insincerely. Aileen's husband cut him off. "You're apologizing to the wrong people." Matt turned to Sarah. "I'm sorry, really." But his voice cracked. Everyone could feel the lie hanging in the air. Aileen's husband turned to the nurse. "He's leaving, now." And that was it. Matt, the big man with the big mouth and the even bigger ego, was kicked out of the hospital, dejected, exposed. I looked down at Sarah. She held her baby close, and her lips curled into the tiniest smile. And for the first time in a long time, I knew she was going to be okay. News travels fast, faster than Matt ever expected. It started as a whisper, just one conversation, one glance, one email sent to the wrong person. But soon, it grew into something bigger, much bigger. You see, Eileen's husband? He wasn't just a president. He was a major client in the industry Matt worked in, a well-respected businessman with decades of credibility, known for valuing honesty, loyalty, and strong family values. And Matt? Well, Matt had just shown the very opposite of all that. Apparently, Matt had been courting Eileen's husband's company for months. It was part of the foundation for his new business venture. He was relying on this deal to launch his company, to prove himself to investors, to make a name. But that day in the hospital, that one moment of arrogance and cruelty, it changed everything. Eileen's husband didn't make a scene. He didn't need to. He simply picked up his phone, made a few calls, and started the quiet process of cutting ties. And it didn't stop there. Matt's company had a long client list, and guess what? Many of those clients knew Sarah. During her time working in caregiving, Sarah had been the bright face at many events. She'd helped organize workshops, hand-delivered birthday cards to elderly clients, offered emotional support that no salesperson ever could. So when word got out about what Matt had done, people didn't just feel sorry for Sarah. They were furious for her, especially the women. The wives, mothers, daughters, sisters of Matt's clients were appalled. One by one, contracts were canceled, referrals disappeared, phone calls went unanswered. His reputation shattered. His business crumbled before it ever took off. Matt was forced to return to his old job, tail between his legs, but the office wasn't exactly thrilled to have him back either. Everyone had heard the rumors. Some had even seen the hospital drama shared in private videos and text threads. He became that guy. The one who left his pregnant wife, mocked her in the hospital, and lost his future in one day. Management shoved him into a corner role. No more sales, no more big clients. He was just there, forgotten, a shadow of the hotshot he once pretended to be. And Kristen? Oh, she didn't last long either. She'd signed up for power, status, glamour, not babysitting a broken man licking his wounds. Without Sarah there to clean the house, prep the meals, handle his emotional baggage, Matt was lost. Kristen tried to keep up with the fantasy at first, but Matt was bitter, angry, and broke. The fights came quickly, loud and constant. Eventually, Kristen stormed out. No goodbye, no second thoughts. And just like that, Matt was alone. Meanwhile, back in the hospital, Sarah was healing. Not just physically, emotionally too. The more time she spent with Eileen, the more she laughed. They watched shows together on Eileen's tablet, gossiped about hospital staff, and traded stories about terrible exes. One afternoon, Sarah even painted her nails pink, her favorite color as a teenager. When I saw that pop of color, I felt tears prick my eyes. Not from sadness, but joy. My daughter was coming back. Even the baby could feel it. He'd gurgle happily whenever Sarah held him, nestling close like he knew he was safe now. When Sarah was finally discharged, we brought her and the baby home. I'd already prepared the guest room, now her room again, with soft blankets, diapers, lullaby music. Our home felt warm again, alive. The nights were a bit chaotic. Newborn cries, diaper runs, bottle feedings, but I loved every second of it. Sarah and I worked like a team, slipping into a rhythm that felt familiar and comforting. One evening, as we were folding laundry together, she turned to me and said quietly, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her shoulders were no longer hunched, her eyes no longer hollow. She was standing tall, holding her baby with one arm and the future with the other. I smiled and replied, "You don't have to thank me. I'd do it all again." She tilted her head. "Even the 3 a.m. diaper changes?" I burst out laughing. "Even those." We laughed together, the kind of laugh that starts deep in the belly and bubbles up like sunlight. It felt good. It felt real. Weeks passed. Sarah was stronger now, healthier, happier, and it showed. One day, Eileen came by with her husband and brought someone else. A friend of theirs, a single father who ran a local home improvement business. His name was Daniel. I'll be honest, at first I was wary. After what Sarah had been through, the last thing she needed was another man in her life. But Daniel was different. He didn't try to impress. He didn't talk over people. He simply smiled, listened, and when he saw Sarah struggling with the car seat one afternoon, he stepped in and fixed it, gently, without showing off. And the baby? Oh, the baby loved him instantly. Bit by bit, Daniel became part of our world. He'd stop by with groceries, offer to mow the lawn, share funny stories from his childhood that made Sarah laugh so hard she'd have to sit down. I watched, silently, from the kitchen window sometimes. Sarah was cautious, but she wasn't afraid. She wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's life anymore. She was choosing. And that made all this difference. Of course, nothing stays peaceful forever. About a month after Sarah started seeing Daniel more regularly, Kristen showed up. Yep, you read that right. She marched up to our door in a skin-tight outfit, sunglasses perched on her head like a tiara, and banged on the door like she was the tax collector. I opened it, barely hiding my annoyance. "Can I help you?" She tossed her hair, scoffed, and said, "I'm here to collect." "Collect what?" "My money," she snapped. "That child support? The one I handed over in the hospital? I want it back." I blinked. "Are you serious?" "I was being nice," she said, pouting. "And now I'm not. I want it back." Sarah appeared behind me, holding the baby. She looked Kristen straight in the eye and said, "No." Kristen tried to argue, threw around insults, called Sarah names I won't repeat. But Sarah stood still, calm, unbothered. And finally, when Kristen ran out of breath, Sarah smiled. A real smile, one filled with peace. "You can leave now," she said. And Kristen did, huffing and muttering under her breath. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the baby nap in his carrier, Sarah turned to me and whispered, "I feel free." I reached for her hand. "You are." Time passed. Seasons shifted. Sarah's hair was longer now, her eyes brighter. Her laugh came easily, often. The baby, my sweet grandson, was growing fast. He'd started babbling, grabbing his feet, and giving the biggest gummy smiles that made even my worst days feel like sunshine. And Daniel? He was still here. He never pushed, never rushed anything. He showed up with consistency, not grand gestures. When Sarah had a bad day, he showed up with soup. When the baby had a fever, he stayed up through the night, holding cold compresses and whispering lullabies. Slowly they built something real, not a fantasy, not a whirlwind, something steady, loving, safe. After a few months of dating, Sarah made the decision herself. She invited Daniel to move in. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I trusted her now. I trusted her instincts. She was no longer that fragile girl waiting for someone to tell her what to do. She was a woman, a mother. And she was choosing love, not because she needed it, but because she wanted it. They got engaged a few months later, quietly. No spectacle, just the two of them on a walk through the park where Daniel had first met the baby. The ring? Simple and elegant. Her smile? Radiant. When she told me, I cried happy tears. I hugged her and whispered, "You deserve every single second of this." And Matt? Oh, Matt. The man who once stood tall with arrogance and entitlement was now, well, let's just say, not so tall anymore. After losing his job, his reputation, and Kristen, Matt struggled to find stable work. Every time he landed something decent, word of his past seemed to follow. Employers didn't want the drama. Clients didn't trust him. He blamed everyone else, of course, claimed Sarah ruined his life, told friends that she turned everyone against him. But people weren't stupid. Matt made his own bed. He lit the match. He walked into the hospital room with a new woman and insulted his pregnant wife to her face. And the world saw it. The community saw it. His clients saw it. Eventually, even his closest connections distanced themselves. He tried to sue Sarah for visitation rights, but by then everything was documented. The nurses, the witnesses, the hospital staff who remembered him barging in. The judge took one look at the case and denied his petition. Later, we heard through someone that he was working odd jobs, delivery gigs, freelance sales, nothing consistent. He moved apartments 3 times in 1 year. Every time I heard a new update, I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate. But I did feel peace. There's something satisfying about the world putting itself back in balance, not through revenge, but through truth. About a year after Sarah and Daniel's wedding, Matt tried one last time. He sent Sarah an email. In it, he said he regretted everything and wanted to talk like adults. He claimed no one else wanted to date a divorced woman with a child, so she might as well come back and rebuild what they had. Can you believe that? He didn't apologize for the pain. He didn't express true remorse. He just saw her happiness and wanted to latch on. Sarah didn't even respond. She blocked him, deleted the email, and that was that. She looked at me that day and said, "I don't feel hate anymore, just nothing. And that's better than anything." I nodded. "You've moved on." "I've moved up," she smiled. Now? Now I visit her house every weekend. The place is cozy, full of love. There's laughter in every corner, toys scattered across the living room, and the smell of cinnamon in the air from her weekend baking. Daniel greets me at the door like family, always offering me tea or pie or both. And my grandson? Oh, he runs to me with chubby arms wide open. "Grandma!" he squeals, launching himself into my hug. I spin him around and kiss his cheeks. Every time. Every visit. Sometimes I sit on their porch while Sarah reads on the couch and Daniel plays peekaboo with the baby. I sip my tea and watch them, this beautiful family that bloomed from the ashes of pain. And I think to myself, she did it. She made it. She faced the storm, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and she came out stronger. Not just as a woman, but as a warrior. The girl I once carried through sleepless nights now carries her own child with grace. The daughter I once consoled through tears now lives with laughter echoing through her home. And me? I'm just grateful. Grateful I was there. Grateful I stayed strong when she couldn't. Grateful that now, today, this moment, we are together. We're safe. We're whole. So now, as I pack a little care basket, fresh bread, baby toys, a book for Sarah, I can't help but smile. Today's visit will be special. I'm bringing her favorite soup and a tiny dinosaur costume for the baby. Halloween is coming up after all. I shut the basket, grab my keys, and whisper to myself, what a joy it is to visit my daughter's happy, healing home.